And hear me, O Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and needy. Guard my life, for I am faithful to you. Save your servant who trusts in you. You are my God. Have mercy on me, Lord, for I call on you all day long. Bring joy to your servant, Lord, for I put my trust in you. You, Lord, are forgiving and good, abounding in love to all who call to you. Hear my prayer, Lord. Listen to my cry for mercy. When I'm in distress, I call to you, because you answer me. Among the gods there is none like you, Lord. No deeds can compare with yours. All the nations you have made will come and worship before you, Lord. They will bring glory to your name. For you are great and do marvelous deeds. You alone are God. Teach me your way, Lord, that I may rely on your faithfulness. Give me an undivided heart, that I may fear your name. I will praise you, Lord my God, with all my heart. I will glorify your name forever. For great is your love towards me. You have delivered me from the depths, from the realm of the dead.
Thank you, Heather. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're well today. It's been interesting. It's been a morning of Psalms, hasn't it, really? And for anybody who knows me and has got really bored with this story, but I have begun a journal, and I've begun a journal since last September, and I'm reading through Psalms, a psalm a day, and just writing it in my journal, and it's been in the most, I would say, fascinating journey that I've had as a Christian, I think, for a long, long time. And I've found that the Psalms are full of emotion. They're full of people who have gone through real situations. They're people a bit like us. People who have gone through real emotions. People who are not afraid to say to God, I'm absolutely in the pits today. But also full of people who say, not to us, O Lord, but to you be the glory. And I wanted to touch really briefly on that, because in Psalm 115, that's exactly how it opens. It opens up and it says, not to us, O Lord, not to us, but to your name be the glory. And why? Why? Because of your love, because of your faithfulness. And I just sense with some Psalms, when I read them, they really resonate with me in the morning. I really find myself actually saying, yes, that's exactly where I am. And you know, for us as a chapel, there is something about the goodness and the faithfulness and the love of God that is able to penetrate right into our situations. The Psalms are not just words written on the page, I've found. I've found that they're actual places that come alive because of relationship with God, because the person has a deep relationship with God. And I love this one because at one point he almost seems to get really bewildered that people would actually worship idols, worship things that have been carved from a piece of wood or cast from a metal. And I'm thinking, gosh, you know what? If I knew God, why would I ever want to exchange a piece of wood for the Lord of glory? I might as well worship a stapler, I thought. You know, it just makes no sense to me. It makes no sense. And but I thought, and I think of these things, and I think, well, God, you know what? I'm going to trust you about this situation. I'm going to trust you that you are my help. You are my shield, you're my protector, you're my fortress. There's something in those words when you declare them that something gets established, that your position changes, that you're not in the same place anymore. And I was reading this through, and I noticed that there were 3 times in succession that the writer says, trust him because he is my help. He is my shield. And I know some of you here, you have that testimony in your life as well. You know that there have been times and situations when you said, actually, God, if you don't come through, actually, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to be at my wit's end unless you come through. And you said that. You know that's the situation. And you have a testimony already that says, that's where you've been. That's what happened. That's how my life changed. That's why you can say, and that's why I often say, not to me, God, but to you be the glory. Because I want him to be glorified. I want him to be preeminent, really, right in the center of everything. And in our house, we have this saying, really, in our house. We say, Lord God, this is your place. It's his place. And therefore, he can do anything he wants. He can do anything he wants. So if people come into our house and they get impacted by God, it's because it's his place. It's because he can do anything he wants. He can bring healing. He can bring refreshing. He can comfort those who need comfort. He can strengthen those who need to be strengthened. And he can encourage those who need to be encouraged. And I say that because I know that this is the God that does those things. There's a prayer in this psalm that says, may you flourish in your life. May you walk joyfully. May you know the peace of God. May you know what it is to walk in a way with God which takes you to a different place than where you were before. And it's been really interesting over the last couple of weeks. Me and Beth, we've seen Steve, and we've seen him broken on the floor after falling off his bike. But we know that there is a God who loves that guy so much, who will bring him to healing, who will encourage him, who will make him flourish. That's a testimony of something that will happen and which we will see. And for you today, wherever you are, whatever is happening in your life, whether it's really good, whether you feel and you know that you're flourishing, give the glory to him. If you know that there's a time and a place in your life where it is difficult, give the glory to him, because you will flourish. He will take you to a different place. I believe that God will do that for you. He's not indifferent. He's not one that sits on the fence. He's not one that ignores you. He's not one that is just, a figure in a stained glass window. He's relational. He's emotional for you. He loves you. He wants to take care of you. And he wants to bring you into different places. And so I want to say that to you. I want to say that to encourage you. I want to say that to bless you. And let me just read that. Let me just find that bit that sort of talks about flourishing. Yeah, it's a remarkable blessing. And it comes, I think, pouring from God's heart in a rush. It's a flood of promises that I will find it, just a minute. The Lord remembers us. He will bless us. He will bless his people. He will bless the house. He will bless this house. He will bless those who fear the Lord, small and great alike. May the Lord cause you to flourish, both you and your children. May you be blessed by the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. And I pray that over each one of you today, that you will know that, that will become reality to you. Amen. I'm going to hand over to the lovely Beth now.
This reading is taken from Matthew chapter 25, and I'm reading from verse 35. For I was hungry, and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you invited me in. I needed clothes, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you looked after me. I was in prison, and you came to visit me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? When did we see you a stranger and invite you in, or needing clothes and clothe you? When did we see you sick or in prison and go to visit you? The king will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers of mine, you did for me. Then he will say to those on his left, Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and you gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, and you gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, and you did not invite me in. I needed clothes, and you did not clothe me. I was sick and in prison, and you did not look after me. They also will answer, Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty or a stranger or needing clothes or sick or in prison and did not help you? He will reply, I tell you the truth, whatever you did not do for one of the least of these, you did not do for me.
And so Beth is charity manager of Cry in the Dark and does a fantastic job, I tell you. And I'm just going to hand over to now, and she'll talk about the rest of today. Thank you.
Thanks, Bernie. Thanks, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a bit of a backup plan. Sorry, apologies. You're meant to have the main man, and you've got the concession prize, but I hope I do all right. If Steve was here, he would have brought Matthew 25 as the scripture to preach from this morning. God gave me some gifts, but preaching isn't one of them unless you're under about the age of 12. I can do the Bible with you if you're a child. So I mean, we could take a moment. But we preach from Matthew 25 because it's the scripture we hold firm to at Cry in the Dark. And Steve would always caveat with, we're not preaching faith by good deeds. We're not saying you can get to heaven by being good. You have to have a relationship with Jesus. So don't hear me wrong when I say we hold on to that. We hold on to that because we love Jesus and we believe that they're the things he wants to find us doing. We don't do those things because we think we can work our way into heaven, but we try and make sure we're living those principles because we love Jesus. Steve should share his story with you today, and it's a fantastic story. And I've worked with Steve for 21 years this year, so I can parrot it to you beautifully. But there's something better about it coming from Steve. So I'm going to leave his story for another day so he can come and share it with you, if that's okay. And I'm going to tell you about Cry in the Dark. I don't know how much you know about Cry in the Dark. I know some people know a lot about Cry in the Dark. But I'd love to tell you what it is we do and why we do it, if that's okay. Thanks, Bernie, for preaching for us, because that's the bit I can't do. But Cry in the Dark's actually been running since 1998. It's been going for a long time now. And we work in the northeast of Romania and more recently also in Ukraine. When Steve started in 1998, there was absolutely no way he had any idea that God's plan was this. I'll be really honest with you. He had no idea it was going to be this long. He was an electrician. He worked in southeast London fixing domestic appliances. He never imagined that he'd end up running a charity. The thing we started first, when I say we, Please remember, I was 8 years old. I don't mean me. I mean Cry in the Dark. When Cry in the Dark started in 1998, it was to answer the immediate call of 26 orphans who all had special needs and were living in horrific conditions. It was a back off to, from Ceausescu. They'd been institutionalised. And even though communism had been gone for 9 years at this point, there were still huge issues on the back of it. And Steve was actually called by somebody who offered him the children, even though he'd never met them. They said to him, "We know you know about the children. If you'd like them, you can have them," which is mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. Anyway, he thought it would be a great idea to go to Romania at this point and maybe meet the children. And God moved. God broke Steve's heart for the children he met in Romania. And in a course of events that led him into a Baptist church, he ended up forming Cry in the Dark and buying the land next door to the Baptist church with the help of the Baptist church and building a home for these 26 children. It was a long process. The home didn't open until the year 2000. Like I said, Cry in the Dark was formed in that moment in Romania. It wasn't there before. So there was some serious fundraising that went on. And by the time the home, which is called Casa Lumina, which means House of Light, by the time Casa Lumina was opened, there was only 24 of the children. But those 24 children that Steve met originally moved into Casa Lumina on the 28th of May 2000, and today they still live there. They're no longer children. They are all adults. Our youngest young man, Radu, he's 3 months older than me, and he quite likes to let everybody know that he's bigger than me. So our young people, I'm calling them young people because it's my category, they range between the age of 35 and 47. So they're not children anymore, but they need care 24/7, and they will need care 24/7 for the whole of their lives. The thing that I think is most joyful for us about Casa Lumina is our guys have now lived with us longer than they ever lived in state care. They've had more good life than they did that life. And if you ever get the opportunity to go to Casa Lumina, it's one of just the best places in the world. One, because there's no social norms to be had, so you know exactly where you stand, because someone either loves you or they want nothing to do with you there. And that's great. I like to know where I stand. But also it's just full of uninhibited joy. Our young people love to have fun. They love to love. They love to see you. And I think if I ever need to feel real joy, I find myself ready to go to Casa Lumina, because that's where it's found. They really love well, and this family unit that's been able to be created at Casa Lumina is just beautiful. Don't get me wrong, it's not easy. 22 adults with additional needs living together 24/7 is not flowers and roses all the time, but there is a real pure joy at Casa Lumina that it's really special to be a part of. And for us at Cry in the Dark, Casa Lumina is our main priority. It will always be our main priority. At the very beginning, Steve and the board of Cry in the Dark made a commitment that Casa Lumina would be a home for life, and that is what it is. So we've become a home for adults, and eventually it will become a home for older people. And we'll kind of fight all those battles and move as times go. But Casa Lumina is our first project and our main priority. Whilst working at Casa Lumina, Steve was visiting. He would attend the Baptist church next door that I've spoken to you about. One Sunday morning, Steve met a young man named Albert. And in English, Albert went up to Steve and put his hand out and said, "Hello, I'm Albert, nice to meet you." And Steve was shocked because he was a really small guy. And, "Oh, you speak good English. Hello, Albert, I'm Steve." And Albert said to Steve, "Hey, do you know what? When I grow up, I'd like to be an evangelist." And Steve was like, "Oh, that's cool, Albert. What a thing to want to be." And he said, "Look, this is my Bible, Steve, and I take it to school." And Steve was like, "Well, you don't need to wait till you grow up, Albert. Look, you're already an evangelist. You already tell your friends about Jesus. That's what an evangelist is." And Albert was like, "Oh, maybe I am already one." And they struck up this friendship. I think at the time, Albert was about 12 years old. And Steve struck up a friendship with Albert, and it turned out that Albert's home life wasn't very good. His mother had passed away, and his father was an alcoholic, and he lived in the town with his aunt. Albert was also very sick, and that became quite apparent when Steve wouldn't see him for long periods of time. And after one of these long periods of time, Steve said to him, "Albert, where have you been?" And he said, "Oh, I was in the hospital in Bacau." Albert actually had HIV, which later developed into full-blown AIDS. And he was hospitalised more and more. There used to be this unit at Bacau Hospital called the Pavilion, which makes it sound wonderful. I can confirm to you it was absolutely not wonderful. And the Pavilion was a place for children with HIV and AIDS. And by default of what happened during communism, a lot of those children that were sick were orphans also. And therefore the care given to them, care is a really loose term, they were not looked after very well at all. There was a lack of education, not just a lack of care, but it was not a nice place to be. And at the age of kind of 12, 13, Albert started coming out of the hospital and just telling stories and kind of saying, this isn't right. How we're being treated isn't right. I don't actually want to stay there. They're not looking after me. And he'd say things to Steve like, "Oh, I wish I could stay at Castellamina instead," or "I'd like to be at Castellamina instead of in the hospital," which wasn't practical. There's obviously still rules about how a person can be looked after. But it did lead to Steve starting to visit in the hospital, and he met a whole community of young people, 12, 13, 14 years old, all living with HIV, majority of them orphans, and all being looked after just appallingly. And he started to speak to the board back here in the UK about what could be done for these children. And the whole time in the background, Albert's just kind of going, "It's not right. How are you going to fix it, Steve? It's not right. How are you going to fix it? What are you going to do?" Because he'd seen from the story of Castellamina that Steve listened and got things done, I think. Steve wouldn't say that to you, but I can say that to you. He listens and he gets things done. And Albert saw that. He knew that he couldn't do anything apart from use his voice. So, I mean, it's a lesson for all of us, really, whether we're 12 or 72. Let's use our voices, because injustice is injustice, and we've got a job to speak up against it. So even if you look at a situation and think, I can't do anything, but I can use my voice and someone else might do something, I think if there's a lesson to be learned from Albert, it's that. Speak up against injustice. Tell someone, get some help, get involved. Let's not just let things go. Because Albert spoke up and something got done. And it wasn't a quick process. But Steve was able to, with our board in the UK and in Romania, to start a palliative care service specifically for children. And to begin with, that started in the community. So the nurses went into the community. And we also started building a hospice, a specific hospice. And Albert got sicker and sicker. He got very poorly. And because there's little ears in the room, we'll leave it. He just got quite poorly. And we started this process of building this unit in Bacau. And there's a cracking bit of video, which Steve will show you if he comes to speak to you, of a friend of ours in Romania talking to Albert about this building and saying, "Oh, look, Albert, our friends in the UK, they think you're really inspirational. And, you know, you've done a really good job about speaking up for your friends. So, you know, the building that they're building in Luncan, well, they've actually decided to call it Casa Albert, which means Albert's house." And his little face is just the best. And he just says, "Wow, after me?" Like, he can't believe it. But this small boy with a really big voice spoke up. And Casa Albert never actually met its purpose as an inpatient hospice. It became a community centre, and we used to run daycare there, and our team worked in the community. But literally hundreds, if not thousands of families were reached, and not just children with HIV and AIDS, children with cancer, children with things like cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy, all sorts of life-limiting and life-threatening illnesses have all been reached and are still being reached today. Because Albert said, "Steve, mate, it's not right. You've got to do something. You've got to tell your friends about my friends. You've got to do something." And God's so faithful, because he tells us what we should be doing: feeding, clothing, visiting, caring. So when Steve went before God and said, "How on earth do we do that?" We're not medical. We don't know. But God said, that's okay. We'll help you. And it's happened. And now today, Casa Albert is still we use it as a centre for our volunteers. But we were able to apply for a bigger grant from Velux, the window people. And we built a dedicated inpatient palliative care unit, a hospice specifically for children. And it's called Hospice Lamina, so the Hospice of Light. But our nurses are still Albert's nurses. They still visit in the community. They're still the Casa Albert nurses. And we have an inpatient unit now with 14 beds for children who need to end their lives well, or children that need respite. And our nurses still visit in the community. So if children need to end their lives at home, they can with their families, and we can make that happen in the right way, because there is a right way. And this legacy of Albert's just kind of lives on and keeps going. And we're all incredibly proud to be a part of that. I never met Albert. Albert went to glory in 2004, and I went to Romania for the first time in 2004. So I never met this little man, but I get to see his legacy every day when we're working, and it's a phenomenal thing. And I was 15 then in 2004, which was a year younger than Albert. And I think for me, it's always been up there. Like, this little man can make such an impact with just his voice. What's God got for each of us? Like, what's his plan for us? What can we do? If we listen and we speak when he tells us to, what can we do? It's phenomenal. So that's our other project, Hospice Lamina. It runs every day. We have a team in Romania that run that. Like I said, we're not medical. I mean, I know a few phrases, but we're not medical. But we've got a brilliant team staffed by Romanians in Romania, and they do a cracking job of really supporting families and making what is the worst time in a family's life just that little bit easier. And then Ukraine kind of came as a curveball for most people. But like I said, Casa Albert at this point is our volunteers centre. So on the back of COVID, it was sitting pretty empty because we couldn't take volunteers to Romania. So when the war started in Ukraine, for anyone that doesn't know, Ukraine borders Romania, and we're about 3 hours from one of the main borders, is Suret into Ukraine. So individually, myself, Steve, and our director in Romania, we all had this kind of like, we've got to do something. We can't just sit quietly with an empty, safe space. So we hopped on a call. I think it was within about 48 hours of the war starting. We'd registered Casa Albert as a centre for refugees. And it was about a week later that the Romanian authorities started sending us people from Ukraine. And in a typical Romanian fashion, they kind of looked at what we do, which is written down as a disability charity, and they decided that being deaf falls into the category of disability. And they sent us only deaf Ukrainians, which was the most interesting experience ever, because we had these 30 Ukrainian refugees. And I suppose what was different for us is we had whole families, because the men could leave. Because they were deaf, they weren't allowed to fight. So the men left. And I think that made a very different situation for the families that came to us, because they could come as whole units. But we had these refugees come to stay at Casa Albert. And it was one of the most awful times of their lives. But there was so much beauty in what happened there. And some of these families now are still our friends. They visit us. They've gone on to live in different places in Romania. But none of them were Christians. Yet all of them asked us to pray at different times. Every one of them. We had a couple of Muslims. One of the Muslim ladies is the one that's remained most involved with us. She still comes and volunteers with us every summer now. We were able to show a little bit of God in what we could do in those ways, by feeding and clothing. And there's an opportunity always to show Jesus, always. And it's miraculous that when we start looking for those opportunities to serve, that we see them so much clearer. And someone famous once said, and Steve would tell you, keep showing people Jesus, show them, show them, show them. And if you have to, use words. And I think it's so true. I think we can just love people into Jesus all the time. So we opened this door into Ukraine, which was a very strange happening. And just on the back of one conversation, we ended up with this connection with a church just the other side of the border in Ukraine. And that itself is mad because he had deaf parents, so he knew Ukrainian Sign Language. So he was like sending these messages to our refugees in Ukrainian Sign Language. Because again, of all the things that could be universal, I don't know why sign language isn't. I know a little bit of British Sign Language. I thought we were going to be absolutely fine. It's not the same. I can confirm it is not the same as Ukrainian Sign Language at all. So that was a whole new world. We all learn a new language. But we've got this connection now in Ukraine, and God's using it, and it's really beautiful. The Pastor Sergei, is the kindest, most gentle spirit, and he loves his people so much. And the city in where they live, Chernovisti, it's become like a refuge inside Ukraine. It's so close to the Romanian border that they haven't been touched by any fighting. But it feels like almost the rest of Ukraine is like emptied out into their city, and they've become this like refuge city. And they're doing such a beautiful job there. And for us at Cry in the Dark, it's more about kind of supporting Pastor Sergei and what he's doing. But the war very much still goes on in Ukraine. It's, you know, we don't hear about it, but it very much still goes on. And the people still need your prayers and your love. So if you can remember them when you're praying, that would be great. So that's Cry in the Dark. They're kind of in real bullet points what it is we're doing. We've got an exciting year coming up. We're heading out to America in the next couple of weeks. Big boss man Stevie C should have been with us, but unfortunately he won't be. So if you can remember Steve in your prayers about that, because it's a bit gutting for him. So a little bit of peace and a lot of patience for the boss man while he heals would be great. We're going to be bringing children from Ukraine into Romania again this summer to run a summer holiday for them. We've got different volunteer trips happening. But we're really just trusting God for what's next, for where we go next, for what happens with Ukraine, all of those things. But I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful that you've let me share what we do with you today. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I know that you guys are supporting Bernie as he comes out to America to raise money for Cry in the Dark. So thank you. And thank you for your prayers for Steve this last week or so. Super grateful. I think he feels totally overwhelmed knowing how many people are supporting him and praying for him and kind of trusting God for his recovery. So that really doesn't go unnoticed. I really am super grateful. I've got a tiny piece of video that it's easy to hear things, but it's so hard sometimes to picture what it is we're on about. So there's a little piece of video just about some of the stuff that goes on in Romania.
I've been volunteering with Cry in the Dark for a good number of years now. I knew nothing about Romania. I didn't know about the stuff going on in the 90s, and it completely changed me.
There's a lot of horrible situations going on in the world that we are seeing on a regular basis in the news, but I think we feel quite helpless sometimes.
What I really like about Cry in the Dark is the fact you're hands-on and you're seeing firsthand the impacts and benefit that you're bringing to people's lives out there.
As a volunteer, you're entering a part of Romania which is very poor, where there are children whose needs are unsupported, and where for a lot of people living with HIV or being born with HIV is a challenge.
You've got families of 6, 7, 8 living in one-bedroom houses. We don't know what their Christmas Day will look like in comparison to what we think Christmas Day looks like. Is completely different. And being able to give something back, even if it's the smallest of things, just, you know, you're going to have a massive impact on their life.
Part of the trip involved us crossing the border into Ukraine, where we visited an orphanage.
This orphanage only had a few people before the war. Now they're in desperate need.
Sometimes it felt like a whole new world over there, but one of the main things that I will take away was the camaraderie. Everybody there in that like-minded, wanting to do our bit to help in some way.
It's a heart-hitting place to go and visit. You have your heart moved, and you might struggle sometimes, but seeing the work that the charity has done, you've got to know that these children are getting the care they need. The the work that Cry in the Dark does has made me have a complete different perspective on life. It's just something that I think people should do more of.
It really brought it home to me how small a world we live in and how we are all connected. We're all human beings at the same time, and that we have a responsibility towards each other to help in whatever way we can.